where we are in just such unprecedented times as you have heard. And so getting the information you need about what to expect in the interview process can be really, really helpful because this may be a new experience for a lot of people. All right, so today I'll talk to you a little bit about our office, University Career Services, and how we're supporting students virtually this summer, but also in the fall as well. So keep an eye out for our virtual events coming to you. We'll talk about when you're planning for a virtual interview, and really any interview, things to think about as you're preparing. So leading up to the interview, things to be mindful the day of and during the interview, and then what to do after an interview. So some of the ways that we support students, at least right now virtually, is we're still having virtual appointments. So you can schedule our appointments through Cougar Pathway. So we'll talk more about Cougar Pathway in a moment. Appointments are great for kind of 30-minute sessions with a career counselor, either via Teams or Zoom. So those are great ways to talk more, especially if you have specific interview questions that you want addressed, or if you want to do a mock interview and practice with a career counselor. Appointments are a great way to do that. We also are offering live chat. So Monday, Wednesday, and Friday between 1 and 4 p.m. we have a career counselor who's monitoring our chats on our website. You can go to uh.edu/UCS and be able to chat with a live career counselor. That'll be going on through next Friday, the 31st, and then we'll start that up again when fall courses begin. We also are offering a variety of events, so workshops like this one. We've offered meet and greets with employers. We're going to have a couple of virtual career fairs in the fall too, so keep an eye out for those. Great ways to connect and learn more about opportunities that you can hopefully then interview with later. You'll see a diagram here on the left. This diagram just refers to the fact that we serve all students on campus. So there are certain colleges that have their own career center, and you can see some of those listed here. But know that even if you're in one of those colleges that has its own career center, I really, really encourage you to take advantage of the resources and events and services in your college's career center, but also with us. So you've got access really to both if you fall in one of those colleges. Some resources that we offer too, in addition to our online services, we have some really great tools online. One is called vmock.com. It sounds like mock interview, but it's actually for resume support. So you can find more information on our website about vmock.com and how to get free resume reviews instantly from our website. I mentioned the virtual chat. We also have a Crew Careers workbook. So today I'll talk about some ways to prepare for interviews and even common interview questions. And you can find some really great tools for your interview prep in our workbook, and that's also on our website. If you're wanting to learn more about yourself, we have some assessments you may want to consider taking as well. So a really common interview question is, tell me about your strengths and weaknesses. And we have different assessments that can help you think about, what do I bring to the table and how do I want to talk about that? So that's something you're interested in. You can always ask me. I'm going to meet with a career counselor to learn more about those assessments. We also offer a career closet. Once we go back to campus, whenever that is, which is a big question on a lot of people's minds, our career closet will be available for you to rent suits. We also have other suit referral resources. So if you're not sure what you want to wear to your virtual interview or in an in-person interview, and you need some support with finding some professional attire, please reach out to our team, schedule an appointment, and we can provide you with some referrals that are still open and available even now. I mentioned Cougar Pathway earlier. This is the tool that you use to hopefully RSVP for this workshop. This is also where you can go to apply for a job. You can actually schedule interviews with employers for what's called on-campus interviews through Cougar Pathway. You can also schedule appointments and upload your resume and cover letter for review as well. So lots of great ways that you can use Cougar Pathway as kind of a portal to our office. All right, before I jump into interviews, I'm curious, about the kinds of things that you are wanting to learn about when you think about interviewing or virtual interviewing, just so I make sure that I answer your questions and kind of cover what you're hoping to get out of this as we go. So if you would add to the chat what motivated you to attend this workshop, and a little bit more about what you're hoping to learn today.
I'm just giving everyone a moment to type into the chat.
And even if sometimes we don't know what we don't know, so sometimes it's hard to know what question to ask, but I'm curious about what motivated you also to attend, if there was something that you thought, this topic might be helpful for this reason.
So I have one question that's come through. So how many interviews typically occur if you're searching for a job as a doctoral student? And then do you typically interview with an HR individual or a recruiter first during the job search process? That's the first one I see. Mm-hmm.
I'm writing these down to make sure I cover them.
And to clarify on that question, they wanted to clarify the number of interviews within the same job. So follow secondary. Okay. In addition, the current changes to the work dynamic and how that's increasing a reliance on online resources during that process for searching. Also, what should be done differently between an online interview versus a traditional face-to-face interview? And as of right now, oh, one more came in. How do you conduct a phone interview and make sure that it's coming from the interviewer as opposed to some other number? But then also how to not be nervous during that process.
The golden question. Mm-hmm. Okay, so so it sounds like how to know on a phone if it really is the employer.
Yeah. Right, so they don't miss the call by thinking it's spam or something else. And then, how not to be nervous during that process. And as of now, those are all the questions I see.
These are great questions. Please do, I have them written down. If for some reason I get caught up in my thoughts and forget to address them, please pause and let me know and say, hey, Warren, I had a question about the phone or video. I also had a specific question around being a doctoral student. I just wanted to clarify, are you thinking about positions in academia or for positions in industry?
She said both.
Okay, so maybe a little bit different for each one. All right, great. So thank you all for these questions. These are really, really great questions to have and great things to be thinking about. So there are many different kinds of interview formats, and some of you have already kind of touched on these, so online versus phone versus in person. So it's helpful to know what the format of your interview is, because it can tell you a lot about what the employer is trying to learn. Now, typically in the past, online interviews or virtual interviews used to really be used as a screening tool before someone would want to bring you in person. So every company has a different interview process. I've heard of everything from maybe 2 interviews is probably the least amount of interviews I've had, 1 to 2, all the way up to 5 or 6. And the series of those tends to grow in length. So usually earlier on in the interview process, they tend to be for less time. And typically in the past used to be, those would be the virtual ones, and in-person would happen later on in the process. So to the question of the number of interviews, I would say anywhere from 2 to 5 can really vary for both industry and academia. But now what we're seeing is, again, more of an increase on the video interview. So I've seen interview processes where the very first interview is a Skype, and other people choose to have the first interview be a phone call, and then maybe a second or third or fourth be video. So I think people are still kind of figuring out what works for them for their process and who really needs to be met with and the purpose of the interview. So all that to say, the format does make a difference. So typically, a phone interview is going to be what we would call like a screening call. So the idea is that someone is wanting to get to know you for maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes. They're probably going to ask you maybe 3 to 5 questions about why you're interested in the job and what you think you bring to the table. And then they may spend some time talking to you about the job. So again, it's kind of a screening, trying to gauge really what you're interested in, see how the conversation goes, things like that. And then it can typically progress into a Skype or video interview. Skype and video interviews, again, these days I think are becoming more common as even a first round interview. Just because I think people are just so used to having video meetings these days. So for a video interview, there's actually 2 different types of video interviews. One is a video recording where you will be given a link to take an interview where you are asked 5 different questions, and what will happen is the question will appear on the screen, and then you have 3 minutes to respond to that question. A lot of times when these are sent out by companies, you have maybe 24 hours from the time you receive that link to complete your responses to those 5 interview questions or however many interview questions they have. But it feels really different because we're giving answers to a screen. There's no person on the other side. What happens is these end up being recorded responses that then a recruiter receives and will evaluate, and then will decide if they want to bring you in for a conversation. So it's kind of like it's still a screening tool, but it can definitely feel a little bit different because it's not a 2-way conversation. Now, one of the benefits of those kinds of interviews is you get 3 shots to respond to each question. So if you don't like how you responded the first time, you have a couple more chances to try again and re-record over. I think with any kind of virtual interview, another kind of pro that you have is you can have your notes in front of you. So if you want to have a copy of your resume with notes on it, questions for the interview, those are all things that you can have right at your disposal, right at your fingertips. So those are some of the purposes. And typically these are screeners, the phone and that pre-recorded video. A virtual interview where you're using like Zoom, Skype, I feel like we're not hearing about it quite as much anymore, Microsoft Teams, any of these other big platforms for video calls. Those are typically going to be, they can vary actually. So we'll see those kinds of formats applied to some of these other in-person formats. So if you think about the purpose of, let's say it's a 30-minute video interview, that may still be a screening. So think about maybe the amount of time that you're in that interview is kind of a better indicator of what that person's looking for. To the question about how do you know if it's an employer, it's hard to know, right? So what I think a lot of employers will do is they may email you to schedule a time over the phone, and then you know to pick up the phone at that time. If you have been applying for jobs and you are awaiting a call for an interview, this is kind of my own tip. I don't ever want to take a call from an employer and be caught off guard. So I don't want to take a call and I'm doing laundry or cleaning the dog or something like that, you know? So what I will usually do is I will let it go to voicemail, and then that way, once I hear the voicemail, I'll know that was an employer calling for an interview, and then I can give them a call back when I'm ready and kind of have my thoughts and my notes ready to go. So that's just a strategy for those phone calls, because it is hard to know, right, if it's spam or somebody else calling you that may not be in your phone book, if it's not a pre-scheduled call, that is. Other types of interviews, I've heard of actually a couple people in places where things are opened up a little bit more having interviews over meals, but not quite as common these days. What are still common though are one-on-one or group and panel interviews. And so each of these is a little bit different. And again, the strategy is going to change because of what the employer is looking for. So in a group interview, what will happen is the employer will say, we'll usually give a problem to a group of people and ask them collectively to solve the problem. So what the employer is looking for is, how do you work on a team? How do you contribute? When do you kind of take a step back from a conversation when you're on a team? But it's really a chance for them to observe how you work with others. Group interviews are also used when employers are hiring multiple people at one time. So if they know they're going to bring on, this is really common in graduate school as well. So if someone knows that they want to bring on 10 people, then they may have different sets of teams of maybe 50 people who are all working with each other and being observed to see how they interact with one another. If you're asked to be a part of and let me back up, virtually, I will say I haven't heard of this happening so much. I do think some graduate programs in the health professions field are still planning to do this, but it would be broken out into like a Microsoft Team or a Zoom channel, things like that. Panels are definitely still happening virtually. So a panel is when you interview with multiple people at one time. Usually the reason for that is because you're going to be working with each person in a different capacity. And so each person on that panel wants to get to know you and maybe looking or asking questions from a different lens depending on their role. So they're not meant to intimidate you, although I have heard of some companies trying to intimidate you to see how you respond under pressure. But typically a panel interview can have a lot of people on it, and that's just because you'll be working with a lot of those people directly, so they all want to get to know you. Typically, group and panel interviews happen after a screening has already occurred. That's typically the case. The reason being that the employer is using more personnel time, and so they want to have a screening first to make sure they feel confident that it's going to be worth the time of the panelists or the other people monitoring the groups. One-on-one interviews are also still happening too. So typically a one-on-one interview, that could be part of the phone setup. So if you are having a one-on-one interview with someone, typically if it's with a smaller company, that first interview that's one-on-one is going to be with someone who might be the hiring manager. So if it's with a smaller organization, they may not have an HR department, and so it may be the people who are doing the work who are also doing the interviews. So again, that's why typically those are going to be hiring managers. If you get to one-on-one interviews later on in an interview process, that's when you're going to probably be meeting with more higher level people. So for example, if there's a CEO or president or an executive director, that's when someone who's higher up, who is going to have some kind of influence on the hiring process, may want to meet with you to get to know you a little bit better individually. So it can depend. With larger companies, that is also where we tend to see a longer interview process. That does include universities too, if you're looking for jobs in academia. So those will have an HR person that typically is going to be your first call, not always, but a lot of the time. And then that may lead to another one-on-one call with a hiring manager, and then additional meetings or additional interviews that are panel style or group style from there. So this isn't always a true progression, but it can vary. But typically we go from having kind of one-on-one that may be phone or video to, for example, a panel where there's more people involved. Typically tends to be the trajectory there. So with that, again, every company does have their own process. Every organization has its own process. But my hope is that by knowing about what the process is, by knowing what kind of format someone's asking to have an interview with, you can get an idea of what they're looking for. So again, panel, you're going to be working with lots of different people, so each trying to see how you might be in that future role from a different lens. Groups, they're looking to observe how you work on a team. One-on-one, they're likely to see how do you get along if they're planning to hire you, or if it's someone in HR, they're probably looking to see, is this person seem to be genuinely interested in the position. Okay, so those are some of the different kinds of formats and the purpose behind that format. With lunch and dinner interviews, those are going to be really focused on people trying to get to know you outside of a traditional interview setting. Again, I'll be curious when we start to see more of those happen, but that's typically the purpose behind that. There's still interviews though, so you still want to treat it as a formal process, but the goal is to try to make you feel a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more relaxed outside of, a conference room or an office, things like that. Any questions so far about these formats and what to expect with them?
None at this time, Lauren.
All right. So ways to prepare, right? The way you prepare is going to depend on the type of interview that you're going to have. I would say always have your resume ready. Again, especially if it's virtually, have notes in front of you. A great way to prepare is to have your resume and the job description side by side. What I recommend doing is then looking at the job description, and next to each bullet point of the duty that it's looking for, write out to yourself an example of when you've done that or when you've demonstrated that skill. That's a really great way to start to think about what examples you might want to share in the interview. So again, definitely take advantage of having some space in front of your phone or the computer where you can be ready and have your notes handy. So that also goes with having a notepad, something to write with, and a glass of water too, because you may be talking a lot. You want to wear professional attire. What I mean by that is, in an interview, people are still expecting you to dress business professional. So even though we're at home, maybe getting used to our stretchy pants, you still want to make sure that you are fully dressing the part of it, just as if you were in an in-person interview. And this is again where if you are wanting some help with finding professional attire, please reach out to our team, schedule an appointment, and we can talk about some referrals we can provide to you to get that attire. You want to be mindful of not just dressing from the top half up, because you never know if you're going to have technical difficulties. So I'll share, I've been a couple times on video interviews where there was an issue where I forgot to grab my headphones, or I needed to go grab a different pair of headphones, or I needed to go check on the internet or move my computer around because where I wasn't, the internet had kind of gone out where I was. If that happens and you get up and you're wearing your shorts or your boxers or whatever, right, that's going to completely take away from that professional image and that first impression you're trying to make. So the other part of that is you'll feel more confident too. If you are fully dressed, you will feel it, and it does make a difference. So you'll likely kind of stand up a little bit taller, have a little bit more of an assertive tone to your voice, and all of those things are going to be really important in how you execute that interview. Knowing where to go. So when you're thinking about virtually recording an interview or virtually having an interview, really be mindful of where you are. Make sure you've got a quiet space without distractions, that you're mindful of what is behind you. I really recommend practicing too. So knowing what parts of your living area have great internet, or at least better internet, or if you need to go somewhere else. I know some people who've done interviews in their car because that was the quietest space that they could go. But plan ahead. Where do you want to have that interview? And what's going to help you be successful in it? So where will you have a place to write notes, right? Things like that. Be mindful of your background. I do not recommend, if you can help it, having your interview in your bedroom. If your bedroom is the only place where you have a little place for peace and quiet, what I recommend doing is using your bed as the desk and finding a chair or something you can sit on that's facing your computer screen. That way your bed isn't in the camera. The reason for that is because our bedrooms are really private, personal spaces, and it's just not appropriate to bring an employer or bring another team member into that space, right? So try to find a neutral space, or at least a way to kind of turn things that you need to, so you can have a relatively non-distracting wall behind you. So the other part of that is, again, know what's behind you. So I have seen students do mock interviews where they've got their liquor cabinet behind them. Just be mindful of what kind of first impression you're giving with what is in that little screen behind your face. Okay, be mindful of that. So again, plan ahead, know where you want to have that interview. If you are also having a phone interview, some of the same things are helpful to keep in mind. Have a place where you can be as quiet as possible, where you know you won't be disturbed. If you live with other people, tell those other people in advance that you're going to have this interview and what time you really need them to be mindful of your quiet time. I also am mindful that people have kids, they have pets, they have other things that are maybe out of their control that might provide a distraction to them. If something happens and you're in a phone call or in an interview and the dog barks or the child cries, whatever it is, it's definitely okay. Definitely just acknowledge it and kind of continue. You can make a joke about it and then continue on with the interview. People know that you are human, that there's things going on in our personal lives. It's a whole new way of working where our workspace and our home space is really intertwined. People will be understanding, but just acknowledge it. The idea here, though, is that as much as you can plan for, that will help really you, so that you don't get distracted, at least as much as possible, so that you can stay focused on the interview. So I mentioned this earlier. It's really important as part of your preparation is knowing what is on your resume and examples of when you've done what the job description is looking for. So I think that's really, having them both side by side is a great way to prepare and really be familiar with what's on your resume, because anything on your resume is fair game for an employer to talk about. Also think about what makes you different from other candidates. What is it that really excites you about this position, or what the company does, their mission and vision? Do be sure that you are thinking not just about the job and not just about the company. Think about both. What is it about the organization you're excited about? And then what is it about the position? So I've definitely seen where people get really excited about, for example, working at the University of Houston, but maybe aren't as excited about the role of a career counselor, or don't know as much about what the actual job entails. And employers can tell that. So make sure you're preparing for both, what you are interested in the job and the employer. And that goes back to knowing the organization. So know what's important to them. Again, I recommend looking at their mission and vision. And I also recommend looking to see, when has this employer been in the news? What's on their social media? What are they posting on LinkedIn? Look to see what are some of the current things going on for that organization as much as you can. Any questions so far about how to prepare?
There are no questions in the chat at this time.
All right. So in addition to knowing your resume, knowing the company, the job description, you have to know yourself. So I love that someone mentioned, how do I get to be less nervous? I think a certain amount of nerves is healthy. I think that's a sign that you care. I think if you weren't nervous, maybe you didn't care so much about the job or the opportunity. So I think that's healthy. But what can be really intimidating, I think, or can cause some anxiety and stress with an interview, is it can feel like we're being grilled sometimes, right? Like people can ask really hard questions. I think reframing an interview to think about, someone is really just trying to get to know you, to see if you might be a good fit for their company and their position. They're just trying to get to know you. So there are specific questions that they're going to ask you to try to get to know you. Now, if the first time you've ever thought about some of the questions that they ask you is in the interview, that's definitely going to feel stressful, because you're going to feel put on the spot. And so it can feel better to spend some time really reflecting and thinking about what you would want to share with an interviewer when they ask you some of these questions. So the idea isn't to come up with a script of what you want to say for every question you think they'll ask, but the idea is to start reflecting and bring some self-awareness about what it is that you bring to the table, and what makes you unique, and what are your strengths, and what do you care about, and what are you doing now? Because again, the employers are going to ask about that because they're trying to get to know you. But think about it, it's hard for someone to get to know you if you haven't spent some time really getting to know yourself first. So I think sometimes framing it as someone's just trying to get to know you can help ease off some of the stress when you're thinking about that someone really isn't trying to just grill me, they're just trying to get to know me. So that said, do spend some time reflecting on these things. We'll talk more about common interview questions, and I hope that by writing out or journaling or reflecting on what you would want to share with these common interview questions will get you thinking about, again, increasing that self-awareness and how you want to express yourself. In particular, it's also helpful to think of examples. So it's really common for interviewers to ask questions about what would you do in this hypothetical situation, or when have you demonstrated communication skills? What's an accomplishment? So they're wanting to know a little bit about your career highlights. And so again, we don't want the first time we're thinking about these highlights to be in the interview. So I recommend thinking of 3 to 5 examples from your past where you're really proud of maybe how you worked on a team, or how you solved a difficult situation, or a project that you worked on. But again, looking at the job description and the things that they're looking for, I recommend using that as a way to generate ideas of the examples you might want to give. So if someone says they're looking for great communication skills, then I would start to think about, when am I really proud of how I use my communication skills, and start jotting down that idea as an example I might want to share in an interview. I am sure you've had plenty of accomplishments in your life, so think about just 3 to 5, and that will usually be sufficient for the interview and the questions that they're going to ask you. So we can't prepare for every question someone's going to ask us, but we can usually frame our 3 to 5 examples to the way the question is asked. And I'll talk to you more about that in a minute, about how that could look. I also mentioned that you may have had a lot of experiences and accomplishments in your life. Know that that can be from broad types of experience. So it doesn't have to be paid work experience. It could be from a class project, a time when you volunteered. It could be an internship that you had, or research that you've done, student organizations you've been a part of. So really think about all those different parts of your life that you could give an example from. I would try to keep it away from too personal of a situation. So if you've had a really great example of when you use communication skills because you had a fight with your best friend and you were able to get through that, I think that may not translate quite as well to an employer. So I would still focus on some of these other more academic or organization-related kinds of experiences rather than with personal relationships. So I talked a little bit about this earlier. Make sure you're really learning about the employer in addition to yourself. So again, look at your resume and the job description side by side. This is actually really great advice even before you apply for the job. So you want to make sure that your resume is also highlighting the things that the employer is looking for in the job description too. There are some really great tools out there that can help you learn more about the employer. So you can always go to the company's website, and like I said, look at their social media. But these are some other websites you can use too. So Vault, Career Search, Glassdoor is really famous, and Riley Guide are all really great tools where you can use to learn more about a company and even learn more about interviews. So on Glassdoor, for example, people who have interviewed for different positions at different companies will go in and talk a little bit about some of the questions that they were asked and what their experience was in the interviews. So that's a great way to get an insider look at what the interview process is like for a company. We talked a little bit about this earlier, so go to their website, look at their mission and vision, look to see who's in leadership too. So remember, even if you're asked for an interview, you are interviewing the employer too. I think a lot of times, especially if we're just really, really desperate and ready to get a job, we can forget to take into account our own evaluation of the employer. So also look at the website to see who is in leadership. If they have a diversity statement, are they actually diverse? Do they look to be inclusive? Do they have diverse affiliations for different people? Is their mission and vision, does it seem to be reflected in the actual work that they do and the people that they hire? Look at their products, look to see what their services are, and look to see who their competitors are too. So what makes the organization different from their competitors? And really, again, think about what is it about this company that I'm excited about, okay? I talked about attire earlier. So this is just a little overview of what we mean when we say business professional. So that typically does mean a suit. So that's going to be a suit, blazer, usually gray, navy, or black. I would not wear what I have on for an interview. I think this would be considered business casual. So we do want it to be, your jacket to be in a gray, black, or navy style. And usually with a shirt that is light in color. So maybe like white, like pink, like light blue, like gray, but some kind of lighter color. The reason for this is I know sometimes people can feel like this doesn't show my personality. And I definitely get that. You can have personality in some of your accessories and things like that, but when you're in an interview, the reason that we recommend these kind of more like neutral styles is because we don't want anything that you're wearing to distract from the content and the qualifications that you have. So if there's something that could be distracting, for example, I don't know, if I had really, really bright colored nails and I start talking and you see me talking with my hands and you start staring at my nails, you're not going to listen to what I'm saying anymore. So that is why we recommend having that more kind of neutral style when you're in an interview, whether virtual and in person. It's just to avoid distractions from what you're actually saying and how great you are and why you're going to be such an asset to that team. Now, I will say for some people, it's really important to have personality at all times. I would say just be mindful of the company you're applying for. So if you apply for a company that really talks about how much they love personality and being fun and really engaging with people, that might be a sign that you can kind of be more, show more of your personality in what you wear, at least in the interview. But if you can't get a sense of that, I would say it's always a safer bet to be a little bit more conservative, at least in the interview process. Be mindful of how your clothes fit, so not just what the clothes are, but do you feel comfortable in them? So if you're uncomfortable, that confidence is going to go way down. So I've seen people at career fairs who are maybe like pulling on their skirt or like pulling on their jacket because maybe it doesn't fit quite right and it's uncomfortable. And think about it, if you're like pulling on your clothing, that's going to distract you from just being fully present with the employer. So it's a little thing, but just how you feel in your clothes makes such a big difference. Be mindful of shoes. So I don't know about you, but I'm barefoot a lot more these days, but definitely wear a shoe that, again, if you need to get up and go, you can do that easily, and that is going to feel comfortable for you and still look professional. We talked about having your accessories. So again, do you have a place to write notes? Have some kind of bag if you need it, but have notes, have your notepad, have your pen and paper, all those kinds of accessories ready to go. And in person, you would want to have some kind of professional bag to put those items in. All right, it's really important to be mindful of nonverbal communication. So I think attire is one way that I think what we wear is a way that we express ourselves. So when we talk about nonverbal communication in our first impression, I think it's 93% of what we communicate is nonverbal. Only 7% is verbal. So again, be mindful of what's in your background and what that says about you. Be mindful of what you're wearing, but also be mindful of your facial expressions, your posture. If you are talking with your hands a lot, again, like I mentioned with that nails example, if you see my hands moving a lot, you're going to start paying attention to that rather than what I'm saying. Be mindful of your eye contact. So in a virtual interview, you want to be looking at the camera. I know it can feel kind of odd because you may want to look at the person who's talking to you in the screen. But in order for them to perceive your eye contact, we want to look at the actual camera. Now that said, you don't want to have a staring contest, so definitely feel free to kind of look at your screen as you need to, blink, so that way you're not just staring at the camera. All of these are important because they communicate something, right? So if I am looking off to the side, and I might be thinking, but someone also might see that maybe I'm not as engaged, right? Or if I'm like looking down, maybe someone thinks I'm looking at my phone and I'm not engaged. So those are things to think about. Slouching. What do you all think slouching in your chair might communicate? You can add it to the chat or unmute yourself.
One person commented laziness.
Yeah. Definitely, right? So let's say, just to give you kind of a visual, let's say I'm doing this. Maybe it's just that I don't have a great chair to work from at home. Maybe I didn't get enough sleep. Maybe I'm just not interested, but regardless of what your intention is, it's knowing that it might be communicated differently than how you intended is important. So being mindful of that you're sitting upright, right? That you're not playing with things. Those are all really important. I think sometimes too, we can get really nervous, as someone mentioned earlier. And again, I think that's normal. But remember, if you're getting an interview, it's because someone is interested in you. They saw qualifications on your resume that they think might make you a really great fit for that job. And they're just trying to get to know you. So this is a really positive thing. So that's why I say, I think nerves are normal, but if you think about it from that lens, put a smile on your face because that is something to be excited about. There is something kind of psychological too about when we smile, it actually does change the emotions that we're feeling. So even if you have to kind of fake it till you make it a little bit, go ahead and put on a smile and see if that changes how you feel when you're in the interview too. Do we have any other questions or comments so far?
None right now.
Okay. All right, so we've talked about the attire, the whole first impression that comes with what's in your background, what you're wearing, your nonverbals, things like that. Now let's talk about the actual verbal part of this, the actual interview questions. These are some really common interview questions. So tell me about yourself, strengths and weaknesses, what motivated you to apply. Each of these questions has, again, a different thing that someone's trying to get to know about you. They're not trying to quiz you and test you, but these are all questions that you want to make sure you're thinking about for yourself too. So I think tell me about yourself is one of the hardest questions. So what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about strategies with each of these questions. So tell me about yourself. This can be hard because you might have many years of life and it's hard to know, what do I share? How much do I share? What do they really care about? So I think tell me about yourself can be tricky to know what to focus on for this question. But a great piece of advice that I've heard is think about your past, present, and future as it relates to this position. So what I mean by that is, what have you done in the past that relates to this position? So what's maybe an experience you had that got you interested in this kind of work? And what kind of classes have you taken? What internships or organizations have you been a part of that relate to this work you're going to be doing? And then what are you doing currently? So what are you doing now for your professional development, to gain more experience? And how does that relate to, and how does this position relate to what you want to do in the future? So when people are trying to get to know you and they ask questions like, tell me about yourself, and even short-term and long-term goals, people aren't necessarily knowing that you're going to be in the same thing for, let's say, 5 years or 10 years, because life happens, right? We're in a pandemic, things change. But people are looking to see that, are you intentional about where you want to go and what you want to do? Or are you just applying to positions for the sake of applying? The reason for that employers want to know this is because they want to make sure that this experience you're going to have make sense to you and is going to be relevant to you and benefit you long term also. And they also want to make sure that it's a position that for them, you may want to stay in for a little while and get some experience with and really be able to do some great work by staying for a little while. So they're really just looking to see, are you being intentional in your application? And is this going to align with what you're looking for and what we're looking for in a candidate? So that's my strategy for telling about yourself. So talk about your past, present, and future goals and how this position relates to them. Strengths and weaknesses. Everybody has a strength. Everybody has areas of growth or things that they can be working on. So think about ones that relate to the job you would be doing. Now, if I am applying for a position as a recruiter and I start to talk about how my strengths or my weaknesses have to do with my cooking, maybe I'm a really, really great cook, that's not going to mean much to the employer because that doesn't impact their evaluation of me or their knowledge of how I'm going to be on the team. So keep your strengths and weaknesses related to the work you'd be doing in that position. So a great way to approach the strengths and weaknesses is think of even two strengths, things that come naturally to you. Usually they're going to be characteristics. So maybe, like for me, one of mine is time management. So I'm going to be really mindful of our time today to make sure that we leave at 1. So I'm respectful of everyone's time. But think about if it's a weakness, what is that kind of quality? And then give an example of what that looks like. For weaknesses, you also want to talk about what you're doing to improve on that area. So again, people aren't asking about strengths and weaknesses as like a gotcha or as a test. They're just wanting to know, do you have self-awareness around that? What does that look like for you? And then also, what are you doing, again, to work on it when it comes to those? One final thing before I take questions on that one is for your strengths and weaknesses too, do make them unique to you. So a really common weakness, and it also kind of serves as a strength too that I hear, is people say, I'm a perfectionist. I just want everything to be perfect. And so I spend maybe too much time working on something. It's a really, it might be true for you, but it's such a common answer that I really encourage you to think a little bit deeper about what that perfectionism looks like and maybe there might be some other qualities you could highlight instead. So what questions do we have so far about these? Oh, I think you're muted, Chelsea.
Sorry. So about those questions and how you're trying to formulate them, how long should you spend answering them?
Great question. You can kind of gauge for yourself if it feels like you've been talking for a while, maybe not enough. You'll kind of feel it in the rhythm of the interview. A good general rule of thumb is anywhere from 1 minute to 2 minutes. When you have those pre-recorded videos, like a video interview we talked about earlier, the response time you'll get is 3 minutes. I oftentimes don't think you need that 3 minutes. I do find that typically a long enough answer is somewhere between 1 to 2 minutes, but great question.
And that was all the questions we had at this time.
All right. I think the main thing too is making sure you're giving enough content. I think most of the time, what I find when I'm practicing with students is we don't give enough information. So I think it's okay to err on the side of giving more information. But I think definitely if you practice by yourself and you find that it goes past 3 minutes, that would be a time to record yourself and then also think about what are really my key highlights I want to make sure I get across and what other information may not be quite as relevant to this question. When people ask what motivated you to apply, again, they want to know what excited you. Is it the job? Is it the company? Is it future opportunities? What's in it for you with taking this job? And that's, again, why we want to make sure you do your employer research first before you go in, so you can really speak to that. We talked a little bit about short-term and long-term goals. Again, even having a general idea of where you think you might want to be, knowing it may change is fine, but have an idea of what do you think you might want to accomplish in the future? What are some experiences you think you might want to have in the future, and be open about that. Sometimes people are looking for advancement and want to know what opportunities are really thinking about leadership. So what I've heard some people say is, I want to be in your job in 5 years or in 10 years. That can feel really threatening to someone. So try to avoid that. Maybe if your goal is to be in a leadership role, you can say that. My goal is to be in a leadership position where I'm supervising a larger team and getting to expand on my knowledge of this area, right? So talk more about those kinds of things rather than someone's specific job title. Why do you believe you'd be a good fit? So again, what is it about the organization, what you've learned so far that makes you think this would be a good fit for you, because you are also evaluating them, remember that. So think about, what is it about this company? Is it the culture? Is it the kind of work that they do? To really be able to speak to what is it about that organization. And then I mentioned that they may ask you some examples. They may ask questions about situations you've been in or scenarios you've been in. The reason that people ask these kinds of questions is because these are probably situations that are happening in their organization. And they're wanting to get an idea of, based on how you've responded to situations like this in your life, they're going to predict how you might respond to those situations in their company. Now, no one has a crystal ball to know exactly how you'll respond with that organization when some situation like that happens. But again, by looking at and learning about your past experience, the employer is going to try to predict as best as they can if that's also how you will respond to things in their organization in the future. So these last kinds of questions I just talked about are what we call situational questions. So situational questions are those questions when they say, tell me about a time you worked on a team, or tell me about a time you had a difficult customer. Or they may ask something hypothetical. What would you do if this? So I've definitely heard this happen for positions in academia. So like, let's say you want to be a professor and someone asks, if a student came to you with this kind of concern, how would you, or had this kind of comment in class, how would you respond to that? Now, the best way to respond to a hypothetical situation is to respond with an example from a similar situation you've actually been in the past. That's going to make it a lot easier for you to speak to what you have done versus what you think you would do. If you have not been in a situation where that is related to what the person is asking you, then you can talk hypothetically about what you think you would do. But if you can, as much as possible, try to recall situations from your past experience. These situations, again, could be accomplishment, times you learned a lesson, something that you're really proud of, a project you worked on, a time you led a team. Think about what are those examples that you're really proud of. And again, those examples can come from a variety of past experiences. Again, try to avoid sharing examples from personal experience, like with close friends and family, but definitely jobs, volunteering, community service, projects. Those are all really great examples to pull from. When you're asked a question like this, it's helpful to use what we call the STAR method. And there's other acronyms that are similar, but kind of get at the same idea. So as you are preparing and you've got your resume and your job description side by side, like I mentioned, you're going to be thinking about those 3 to 5 examples of when you've done what the job is asking for. Write out those examples in terms of the STAR method. So that way you start getting used to thinking about and telling stories from your past in this way. So what the STAR method is it starts with situation. So talk about what was the situation, what was going on at the time, really set the stage for what was happening, paint a picture for the employer, because they weren't there. A lot of times, one of the biggest areas I see for improvement with these kinds of situational responses is people don't give enough information to start out with. And remember, no one had that experience but you, so we need just a little bit of detail to get an idea of what was going on for you. The T for task is what were your tasks. So talk about what was the situation, and then what was your role in that situation. And then A, action, what actions did you take in that situation? So if there's a problem you're solving, what did you do to solve the problem? try to focus on your contribution, not a team. So even if you worked on a team, focus on your role in the team because the employer is hiring you, not your whole team. And then result, what was the ending? So as a result of you solving the problem and taking actions, what happened? Now, this doesn't always have to be a positive thing because we definitely all experience challenges. But if you experience a challenge, focus on what did you learn from the challenge and what would you do differently in the future? What did you achieve and maybe learn about how to resolve to different kinds of obstacles you may encounter in the future? So try to still find the silver lining in terms of, if this was my experience, what did I learn from it? What did I take away? And then what was the result? Can also mean too, if you're talking about a class project, did you get an A? Or if it was a work project or an internship, what was the result of the presentation that you gave? So to talk about what did your actions lead to. So here's an example that really elaborates the S, T, A, and R. So you can read this here. Someone might talk about their situation as during their third year, they were elected VP of a program for their student association, and the duties included securing speakers for meetings, advertising the programs in campus community, introducing speakers, and evaluating each program. So we can see a lot of information is given here for the situation. So you really know what kind of role this person's in. So their task. So the task is, they noticed attendance has started to decrease and they wanted to find ways to implement more programs to increase attendance. So now we know what task is kind of being appointed to this person. So then action, what did they do? They assembled a team to help with the programs and selecting speakers. They determined what people's interests were, so they evaluated programs, they did some surveying, and then they decided to identify why attendance dropped and what they could do to increase attendance. So then as a result, they gathered the information from surveys, they were able to select speakers based on the interest, and were able to create a brochure and advertise all of the speakers and professional development that student organization was going to do. And then the ultimate result is, because of their role and contribution, attendance increased 150% from the previous year. So this is a really great example of how to give enough information when you're telling a story. Now, I can imagine seeing this and thinking that is a lot of information to try to write down or memorize. But again, remember, we're not trying to memorize our stories in advance. What I find to be helpful as you're preparing for an interview is to think of these 3 to 5 examples and think of them as like an outline. So write out what would be my S, my T, my A, my R in terms of the main points I want to make sure I get across. I really do recommend avoiding a script, because if you really try to write out a full script like this as you're preparing for an interview, you're going to forget something. You're going to forget an I or a they or a my, and it's going to throw you off. So really think about the STAR method in terms of an outline of the key highlights you want to make sure you share as you're giving that example and telling your story. So we talked a little about some of the strategies for tell me about yourself. I want to see how we're doing on time. Oh, we are right at 1 o'clock. Time goes by so fast. So I know Chelsea has to jump off. So Chelsea, if you don't mind adding the workshop survey for everyone. And then I'm going to spend about 5 more minutes kind of closing us out with some final thoughts and considerations. So that way you have some final things to think about, and I'll stay on for a little bit longer if you've got some questions for me. So thank you, Chelsea, for helping us get into the chat today.
Absolutely. And I do, before I leave, wanted to add one question that came in at the chat. And so that was going back to you talking about strengths and weaknesses. So yeah. Is it okay to use that same example as both your strength and your weakness? And then just as a little note, I'm going to put a link to our career workbook as well in there, so you can reference that at your leisure.
Thank you, Chelsea. So thank you for that question. I would recommend coming up with something different. Because definitely I can see where there are 2 sides of the same coin. So if something comes really naturally to you, you might have a blind spot related to it also. I do recommend coming up with 2 different examples. So one that is just a really natural strength and maybe is different, it could be somewhat related, but still different area of growth for you. What can be really helpful is some employers these days are even focusing on, they're trying to kind of trip people up a little bit by asking more than one strength. So I recommend thinking of 2 to 3 strengths and 2 to 3 areas of growth. I think if we're all truly honest with ourselves, there probably is more than one thing that we could be working on or are working on. So try to think of 2 to 3 that are different for the strength and the weakness. That's a really great question. Some things to leave out, we talked about what to highlight in these answers. Some things to leave out would be mentioning your age, your nationality, your marital status, your interests or hobbies, information about other people. So again, when you're giving your examples, try to focus on what your role was. Similarly, if we are talking about the question, tell me about yourself, you don't need to say, I'm 20 years old and I'm from this country and I got married last year, because all of those things are not going to impact how you do this job. And these are actually things where employers, they may not say that they have biases against these things, but they do. There are statistics that show that people, especially women who talk about, having kids, for example, are less likely to be invited for the position, right? So think about, how can I focus on just my experience without giving too much just personal information that isn't related to whether or not I can do the job? We also want to keep information positive. So if you are asked a question about something about a conflict you've had, you don't need to talk about how awful the other person was or how they were in the wrong. Keep it to, what did you learn? What were your tasks? And what did you learn from that situation? And how would you go about maybe navigating that situation differently? So try to be as positive as you can. You also never know who knows somebody else. So be really mindful of how you talk about people you've worked with. Also, if you're negative when you talk about past experiences, people may assume that you just have a negative attitude, and nobody wants to hire anyone with a negative attitude or invite them to their program. So do try to keep a positive attitude and focus on what you've learned and what you can bring to the table. Let's see, I'm going to we talked about this a little bit. So area of growth, stay positive, describe how you're working on your weaknesses, and give an example. So if my example is time management, one of the things I'm doing is trying to check the clock more often, right, to make sure I'm keeping people on time for a workshop as an example. So give an example of what does that weakness look like and what are you doing to work on it. We talked about some of these strategies. So what I want to do is think about wrapping up with questions for them and then your follow-up. So think about, this is a lot of questions here. I would maybe just start with 5 questions you have for the employer. One question I would absolutely ask is, how are you doing? How has your team been impacted by the pandemic and with everything going on? I would absolutely ask that first, just from a side of making a human connection with people. And then also it's going to tell you a lot about the company and how they've been able to respond and adapt to change. So definitely ask that question in your 5, in addition to things like, what would my workday look like? How would I be evaluated? What are your expectations, especially given that I may be working virtually? Will I be working virtually? So those are some really great questions to ask. I encourage you to take a picture of this. And feel free to tailor these to the position that you are interviewing for. Okay, but again, really 3 to 5 is a great place to start. Don't ever say no. No may show that you haven't done your homework and maybe haven't thought critically enough about the things you don't know, because there's a lot you don't know about the company because you're not working for them yet. So do come up with 3 to 5 questions of things that would be helpful for you as you're also evaluating them in this interview. Make sure to also ask about next steps. In your question for them, ask about what are the next steps from this interview? What does the rest of the process look like? When should I expect to hear back? Those are all great questions to ask. Make sure you have contact information so you can also follow up with them with a thank you note, because that leads to how we follow up. So a great way to follow up with someone is to send, I think, both a thank you email and a letter. So if you can get an address from someone, if they're checking mail at the office, a handwritten letter can be a really, really nice touch to send someone in addition to an email. We want to send that thank you note within 24 hours. So that way you're still fresh on their mind and the interview is still fresh in your mind. This is an example of what that thank you note could look like. Some key things are to address their name, thank them for their time, highlight something that you learned about the opportunity or the organization that you're really excited about, and then highlight something from your own experience that you want to reiterate about how you can contribute to them, and then say that you look forward to hearing from them. So just some of the key elements of the thank you note. Here's another example of how that could look. So again, my name is this. I interviewed with you for this position. I was really excited about the organization for this reason and learning this. And then here's more information that relates to what I learned that makes me think I'll be able to contribute to your team. So we talked a lot about the follow-up. I mentioned some resources earlier. These are some online resources we have available. One is at vmock.com to review your resume. This is really important because a lot of people are selected for interviews based on the keywords they use in their resume, and vmock.com will actually help you with scanning for using certain keywords, so definitely check that out. The link to the Careers workbook was sent in the chat, so thank you to Chelsea for adding that. That's a great place to go to practice some interview questions and have a place to kind of think through how you might want to respond to those questions. I talked a little bit about our chats earlier, and so I just want to give you our contact information. Please go ahead and take a photo of this. We're on social media at Coop Careers. You can also email us and check out our website and also schedule an appointment with Cooper Pathway. Like I said, we are still serving students virtually at this time, and we hope you take advantage of it. So I know I went through this last part quickly. What I'll do is stop sharing my screen and I can check to see if there's any questions that you all have for me. Yeah, someone said, can you give an example of how to start talking about yourself? So it's going to depend on the position, but when you get that question, tell me about yourself, you want to talk about, like I might say, hi, my name is Lauren, and then I would talk about my past work experiences that have shaped my interests and what I want to do next. Then I'm going to talk about what I'm doing currently, and then I'm going to talk about what I would do in the future. So it's hard to give an example on the spot, but if let's say I was applying for another career counselor position, I would say, my name is Lauren Herman. I have a background in career counseling through my coursework and my master's degree. I had an internship in these areas. I've been doing career counseling for this long. And these are some of the reasons I'm really excited about career counseling. Then I would say what I'm doing now. So I'm currently a career counselor at University of Houston. These are the students that I serve. And in the future, I would like to use that knowledge and continue it to serve different populations or to continue that work with your organization. So that was a very quick abbreviated example because again, I want to give it about 1 to 2 minutes, but talk about what you've done in the past, present, and what you want to do in the future related to your job, and try to keep out your dogs, your cats, things that don't really relate to them hiring you. Yeah, someone asked, can I see the slides again for the questions to ask them? I'm glad that example helps. Yeah, absolutely. So let me pull that up. I'll give everyone a minute to take a picture of that too. Give me 1 second to get to it. I went through a lot in a little bit of time, y'all. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. So here are those questions for them. So again, go ahead and take a photo of this. You can also find some of these questions in our Coop Careers workbook. But again, think of maybe 3 to 5 questions we do not want to ask. By the way, we don't want to ask what the salary is. We don't want to ask what are the opportunities for advancement. Those are questions that may come across as being more interested in long-term gains or things outside of the actual job you're applying for. So keep your questions to the company and to that specific job in terms of the job duties and the tasks that you would be doing, and even the environment you would be working in. But avoid asking about salary. We actually have a whole nother workshop just about salary negotiation, and you can learn more about the strategies for how to talk about that then. I'm stop sharing my screen so I can see if there's any other questions. All right, I'm glad that that helped. All right. So I told you all I'm working on my time management, and so since we are about 10 minutes after, I hope that you will take advantage of the resources that were shared today, like our workbook, scheduling an appointment, and please also give us feedback. Use that link that Chelsea posted. I will repost it too. Let us know what you would like to learn more about. Actually, it looks like we didn't make it to the chat. I'll send out an email to everyone that attended today, and make sure that you get that link so you can give us some feedback about what you liked, what you didn't like, and how this experience was for you for this virtual interviewing workshop. All right, thank you all. Thank you for being here. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe, and we hope to see you on our next virtual workshop soon.